Okay, so on the 3rd of January 2026, the US engaged in a brutal act of imperialist gangsterism. That night, the US military and special forces got the green light from US President Donald Trump to commence Operation Absolute Resolve, launching airstrikes on the capital of Venezuela and succeeding in the violent abduction of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, from their safe house. Trump, at the time, watched live from his Mar-a-Lago club in Palm Beach, Florida, surrounded by key advisors, including CIA Director John Ratcliffe and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, as hundreds of U.S. jets rained missiles from the skies and U.S. forces on the ground helped storm Maduro's fortified compound, killing at least 40 people, including civilians. This is Trump quoting what he saw. It was an incredible thing to see. If you would have seen what happened, I watched it literally like I was watching a television show. And if you would have seen the speed, the violence, it was an amazing thing, an amazing job that these people did. And so remembering, this is Trump talking about the US dropping missiles on a sovereign country, coming in and abducting the president and his wife. And he's boasting about the violence and the incredible brutality that the US has exerted. In the months leading up to this US act of gangsterism, Trump deployed thousands of US troops to the region, joining an aircraft carrier and dozens of warships in what amounted to the largest military buildup in that region for decades. This followed what we saw, several deadly attacks by the US on so-called narco boats, small boats in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific, carried out on the false pretense of combating drug trafficking, which killed at least 95 people since November 2025. Trump in part sought to justify the strikes and the abduction of Maduro by continuing to allege, as he had for many, many months, that Venezuela was smuggling fentanyl into the United States and that U.S. sovereignty and U.S. national security as a result depended on taking Maduro out. But not only is there no evidence that fentanyl is passing through Venezuela or that these vessels were in fact carrying any illicit substances, but in any case, the U.S. actions, and you clearly see this from the words and from they're very open about it, that the U.S. actions were not aimed at any kind of humanitarian ends, but were about imperialist plunder and domination. So like I just said, in very typical Trump fashion, the U.S. administration has been very candid about the real reasons for the intervention. So as we know, Venezuela holds the largest reserves of crude oil, over 300 billion barrels, and most of this is in the form of very heavy oil, which the U.S. actually doesn't possess in quite large quantities. In late December, after the U.S. seized several oil tankers off the coast of Venezuela, Trump told reporters, "We're going to keep it. Maybe we'll sell it. Maybe we'll keep it. Maybe we'll use it in the strategic reserves. We're keeping the ships also." Following the attacks, Trump has seized a further 5 tankers and has declared that the United States will run Venezuela and will restructure the economy in a way that's conducive to U.S. reaping oil profits. So another Trump quote, "We will rebuild it in a very profitable way. We're going to be using oil and we're going to be taking oil. We're getting oil prices down and we're going to be giving money to Venezuela, which they desperately need." I'm a bit suspicious about that last part, but I absolutely in terms of that they're reaping Venezuela's oil resources. Trump has said that the U.S. will get between 30 million and 50 million barrels of oil from Venezuela and has suggested that the U.S. might control Venezuela's oil sales and revenues indefinitely. He has another justification for this, which is that according to him, years ago, Venezuela made the greatest theft in the history of US America. They took our oil from us and they stole our assets. And so this is Trump referencing the wave of nationalizations that began in 1976 under Venezuelan President Carlos Andre Perez. But what happened in that wave of nationalizations wasn't expropriation without compensation, which I think would have been very much justified, but actually the Venezuelan government at the time made the oil company contracts expire 7 years early, came to them and proposed new contracts, giving Venezuelan state oil and gas companies majority control and giving the foreign oil company execs significant compensation. Trump right now is also proposing to end U.S. sanctions on Venezuela. These sanctions, imposed by the U.S. for many, many years, have been designed to cripple the U.S. economy and have amplified the pain experienced by ordinary people in Venezuela. But the reason that Trump is proposing to lift those sanctions now is that it's giving an opportunity for U.S. capital and U.S. oil to come in and to reap profits of Venezuela's workers and poor. I think it's a similar logic. It underpins Trump's decision to keep on Maduro's vice presidents, Delcy Rodriguez. He, in quite a bizarre way, showered her with praise, whilst completely blanking the opposition leader, Maria Corina, I can't say her name, but who's a very ardent Trump supporter herself, who lobbied incredibly hard for his support. He told the media that she didn't have the respect of the people. So I think that just his reasons for doing that is that he wants to have a stable government that can claim continuity with Maduro, but whom he can bully and he can extract from what he wants, which is essentially better conditions for U.S. capital accumulation. Now that's, I think, Venezuela, but I think you can't really understand Trump's attacks on Venezuela outside of understanding the broader strategy and aspirations of U.S. imperialism in that region, in Latin America as a whole. So since the attacks on Venezuela, Trump has threatened to launch similar military operations against Colombia and Cuba, urging Cuba to make a deal or face consequences. He has made veiled threats against Mexico and has continuously demanded U.S. control of Greenland, describing it as very important for national security. Greenland is currently an autonomous territory of Denmark, and so Denmark is also pushing against Trump on that. Importantly, Trump's actions are not the kind of random machinations of a madman, but are very rational from the point of view of U.S. capital. It's an attempt by the ruling class to address the situation in which they're in, which is a serious economic decline in relation to what is the astronomical growth of China over the past decades, and in particular the inroads that China has made into these Latin American economies. So one measure of the relative decline of the U.S. in terms of industrial production is seen in the statistics for U.S. auto manufacturing. So in 1995, the U.S. boasted 25% of the global market shares for auto manufacturing, which dropped down to 10% in 2025. So that's 30 years later. Meanwhile, China, starting from a base of 1% in 1995, rose to capturing 22% of the market this last year. U.S. Secretary of War Peter Hegseth kind of gave the game away in Latin America, announcing that with President Trump, we're going to reclaim our backyard. And so the U.S. ruling classes has sought to restore the Monroe Doctrine, which is a 2-century-old policy that deemed Latin America the backyard of U.S. imperialist interests. And all of this is fully laid out in Trump's national security strategy document published in November 2025. And so, again, I'm going to read a quote out, but essentially it's saying, after years of neglect, the United States will reassert and enforce the Monroe Doctrine to restore American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere and to protect our homeland and our access to key geographies throughout the region. We will deny non-hemispheric competitors the ability to position forces or other threatening capabilities, or to own or control strategically vital assets in our hemisphere. This Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine is a common sense and potent restoration of American power and priorities, consistent with American security interests. So when they're referring to non-hemispheric competitors, that's a clear reference to China. which has made significant investments in resources, technology, and finance in Latin America, becoming the region's largest trading partner, actually surpassing the US. Before the US seized Maduro, most of Venezuela's oil exports were going to China, though about 200,000 barrels a day were coming to the US under Chevron's special license that it had. In September last year, China installed the first Chinese-run oil platform in the country, and Chinese loans to Venezuela totaled $60 billion. Most recently, Venezuela was the biggest buyer of Chinese-made armaments. It's a similar kind of situation in some of the other Latin American countries. So Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile together hold approximately 60% of the world's lithium. Since 2018, China has invested some $10 billion into Latin American lithium extraction. In Chile, Chinese companies also own 57% of electricity distribution. So you really see those inroads that Chinese capital has been making. Now to Greenland. Greenland holds massive deposits of the world's critical minerals, actually holding an eighth of the world's critical mineral resources overall. These are essential in the production of high-tech applications, from smartphones, laptops, to countries' advanced defense systems. The U.S. General Laura Richardson, who headed the U.S. Southern Command until quite recently, said, "Our competitors know that. Our adversary know that this region is so rich in resources, it's off the charts rich." So one of the reasons for the intervention in Venezuela and the bullying of the neighbors is kicking out competitors such as China and US, or preventing them from accessing what are untapped rare earth resources in Greenland. We'll skip that. But I think anyone all of this is the kind of context in which the attacks on Venezuela are taking place, and it's a way of the US of trying to restore its power, of trying to address the elephant in the room, which is China, but and trying to develop a new imperial strategy to do that. But at the same time, I think it needs to be recognized that as very much as it tries to avoid or deter China, it finds itself locked on a kind of ever escalating war path as well. Anyone who's been on the internet and seen the countless memes floating around knows that the US has had a long and sordid history of regime change, imperialist meddling in Latin America. US imperialism ransacked the region with free trade agreements that gave multinational corporations access to cheap labor and raw minerals in the 90s. Between the year 1898 and 1994, the US openly intervened in Latin America 41 times. The US military and the CIA have supported countless attempts by dictators or military regimes to overthrow governments, including in Venezuela, but I think most famously in Chile, supporting Pinochet's coup of Allende in 1973. And more recently, we've seen the US pour funding to support the election of the Argentinian far-right government of Milei. So that there's a very good reason for us to chant US imperialist, number one terrorist, and to see that the US continues to be the main imperialist aggressor in the world. Now, coming to inside Venezuela itself. So as I think everything that I've said before should make clear, our starting point when looking at Venezuela is to stand absolutely and trenchantly with the ordinary people in Venezuela and Venezuelans resisting U.S. imperialism, opposing the decades of economic suffering that the U.S. has helped impose. And so to our own ruling class and to the U.S. we say hands off Venezuela. In the near recent past, ordinary people in Venezuela have shown a massive capacity to resist and to shake off, to have an intifada against US imperialism. So when the US tried to engineer regime change in the 90s and the 2000s, it was the resistance of ordinary people from below that meant that this spectacularly failed. The Bolivarian resistance, which took place, threatened US interests and saw the left leader, Hugo Chavez, rise to power in 1999 with mass support. Another example is, skip that, it's fine. So there's several examples of that resistance from ordinary people against the imposition of IMF loans is another example, and US imperialism ransacking the country. At the same time, the Venezuelan ruling class never accepted the legitimacy of Chavez or workers and poor people having a say in politics. But even after Chavez was elected, there was a high degree of popular mobilization and organization. This was responsible for defeating a more recent US-backed coup and bosses' attempt at sabotage, such as the oil bosses' lockout, which threatened to crash the Venezuelan economy in 2003. And in fact, as a result of popular mobilizations, this coup attempt was defeated in less than 48 hours, which is quite a miraculous feat. So compared to this kind of history of resistance from below, looking at Venezuela now, the response we're seeing is comparatively muted, with sections of the Venezuelans welcoming the overthrow of Maduro, or certainly what we see is not that same level of resistance popping up as we've seen in the past. And there's some important reasons for this, and that we need to go over. So under Maduro, an unaccountable bureaucracy and corruption grew around his ruling party, the PSUV, while ordinary Venezuelans faced a growing social crisis. And the Maduro government, while it was in power, implemented policies that I think naturally drove disillusionment and drove disillusionment amongst the workers and poor. So, for example, his government pushed Labour's share of national income to one of the lowest debt rates in the world, meaning that workers were getting a lowest proportion of GDP of national wealth compared to other nations. He implemented one of the harshest austerity programs, pushing government revenue as a percentage of GDPs not seen since pre-Chavez levels. He massively militarized the police, murdering civilians at a higher rate than any other security forces. He instituted a ban on every single left-wing party and removed basic electoral rights, such as the right of an election to be verified by the people. There's countless other examples. Persecution of environmentalists and indigenous rights activists, introducing programs to combat what he calls trans ideology, claiming trans people are human aberrations and part of imposing a new world order. So looking at that list, you can kind of see that there's no need for anyone who wants to defend Venezuela to kind of falsely paint Maduro's government in socialist colors. There's really no need to do that. And it's precisely because his government wasn't socialist, and because they didn't break with capitalism, because they didn't look consistently enough to the power of the working class and the poor, and because they did the opposite, as I've outlined, that Maduro has undermined the very layer of people, the workers and the poor, who possess the power, who've been shown to possess the power to defend him and to defend Venezuela from the imperialist plunder that has started and that is going to come. And comrades in the room can probably draw parallels with the Whitlam coup. I think there are some parallels there as well that people might like to go into. But I think what we're seeing now in Venezuela is where there's actually a section of the Venezuelan ruling class that is welcoming the opening of the Venezuelan economy to an influx of US oil and US capital. Critically, I think the direction where the struggle inside Venezuela will go is absolutely contingent on the actions of ordinary Venezuelans themselves, and the possibility of, seeing the need to organize those protests, seeing the need to organize actions from below, not just against the US imperialists, but also against the oil execs and the businesses and the sections of the ruling class that are busy making concessions, that are busy paving that way for the US to kind of come in. And so I think as socialists, it's this ongoing resistance of ordinary people that we look towards, both in Venezuela and crucially here. And I think here, to conclude, because we're at 20 minutes, I think here we have some crucial tasks as well. So if we understand the imperialist attacks on Venezuela in the way that I've outlined, that it's not just about Venezuela, but it's also about U.S. imperial domination of the West, of the Northern Hemisphere and of Latin America, and that this is to do with keeping China out, then our task is absolutely to stop the drive to war with China that we're seeing in our region. So we have a very clear reason to say Australia and the AUKUS alliance cut ties with the US, but more than that, we have to fight Albanese and end the domestic military build-up that we're seeing in our country, where we're seeing actually the alignment with the US and China is growing, and we're seeing from universities to new defense industries to all around the continent, we're seeing that the drive to war occurring, and it's incumbent on us to understand that that's Australia's own sub-imperialist interest, and that the best way that we can support Venezuelans is to fight US imperialism and fight Australia's role in that.